This lecture reviews the different types of sediment and important sedimentary structures. Observations and interpretations of these features is crucial, not only in figuring out the mysteries of sedimentary rocks, but also in reconstructing processes and sedimentary environments of the geologic past. Shown here are MCC students and faculty sledding down the slip face of a gypsum sand dune in White Sands National Park, New Mexico. We again refer to the rock cycle, a descriptive map of the various processes that occur during a rock's lifetime. At the Earth's surface, material weathered from bedrock outcrops may be transported away by different types of erosion. The loose solid debris, or sediment, is moved by wind, water, or ice, and transported to various environments where it is deposited. These depositional environments include places like floodplains, desert sand dunes, beaches, etc. Loose solid particles derived from the weathering of pre-existing rock are called sediment. Sediment exists in various forms that can be described by the size, rounding, and sorting of the particles. These two images show sediment of different sizes and really highlight the need for scale, so we can know how large or small the particles are. Can you tell which image has the larger particles? Yes, that's right. Larger gravel-sized sediment is on the left, and smaller sand-sized sediment is on the right. Sedimentary particles are referred to as grains or clasts, and they are classified mainly according to their size. Particles larger than 2 millimeters in diameter, or about 1/10 of an inch, are classified as gravel, which includes granules, 2 to 4 millimeters in size, pebbles, 4 to 64 millimeters, cobbles, 64 to 256 millimeters, and boulders, anything greater than 256 millimeters in size. That's almost 26 centimeters, a little bit larger than a basketball. It's a pretty big particle. Sand is a size term that describes clasts with grain sizes from 2 millimeters to 1/16 of a millimeter. Sand sizes range from very fine-grained to fine-grained to medium-grained to coarse-grained to very coarse-grained. All sediment smaller than 1/16 of a millimeter is termed mud, which includes silt, which is 1/16 of a millimeter down to 1/256 of a millimeter, and clay, which is less than 1/256 of a millimeter in size. In fact, clay-sized particles are very fine-grained and typically feel smooth to the touch with no grittiness. Even so, sometimes silt and clay can be difficult to distinguish. That's why I typically use the more general term mud in such cases. Sediment rounding describes the rounding or smoothness of the clast edges. Rounding progresses from very angular to very well-rounded, with a variety of forms in between. Sorting is a measure of the range of grain sizes in a sediment. Sediment sorting spans the spectrum from very poorly sorted to very well sorted. Very poorly sorted sediment includes a wide range of class sizes, whereas very well sorted sediment is composed of mostly clasts of similar size. Various stream processes reduce the class size and increase the clast rounding with distance. These processes include abrasion, where particles impact the stream channel walls, attrition, where particles impact each other, solution, where the particles are dissolved into the stream water, etc. Sediment progressively becomes more fine-grained, rounded, and well-sorted with increasing distance of transportation. These characteristics are eventually lithified into the rocks formed from this sediment. Size, rounding, and sorting of clasts can be used to tell us about their transportation and depositional history and environments. First, we can interpret the distance sediment has been transported from its source area. Smaller, more well-rounded and well-sorted clasts represent more abrasion and attrition that occur over longer transportation distances. Current energy during transport and deposition can also be estimated. Larger clasts, like boulders, require higher energy for transport, so may indicate a beach or stream channel environment. Smaller pieces require lower energy before they can be deposited, so they may indicate deposition in a lake or floodplain. Sedimentary structures are features that form during sediment deposition. They can provide important clues to the nature of depositional processes and environments. These are commonly preserved in sedimentary rocks and volcanic tuffs. For example, the shape of these current ripple sedimentary structures forming today in shallow water may indicate flow direction, which can be observed directly. Just wade out into the water and find out. The rock on the right preserves similar structures, also indicating current movement, which we can infer even though the rock and the current flow it represents may be millions of years old. You can't walk out into the water as easily there, but the current ripple sedimentary structures allow us to infer that there was water there and which way it was moving, if it was moving. Bedding is an easily recognizable sedimentary structure, formed in sedimentary rocks and even volcanic tuff. Bedding forms as sediment or volcanic ash, is deposited in water or air in horizontal layers or beds under the influence of gravity. If you see consistent parallel layering in a outcrop or cliff face, especially if it's not steeply tilted, it's probably bedding that you're looking at, and the rock is likely sedimentary or volcanic tuff. We can see bedding forming today, like in this stream, and we can infer similar processes formed bedding in rocks that are millions of years old, like the 270 million year old Kaibab Formation in the Grand Canyon. Graded bedding is where particles decrease in grain size upwards in a bed. This sedimentary structure represents waning flow after a flood event. During a flood, sediment of all sizes is carried and mixed together by high-energy flow. As the energy decreases, larger particles settle out first, followed by progressively smaller particles, and eventually forms a graded bed. Ripple marks are small ridges in fine-grained sediment, like sand or mud, that are formed by either wind or water current flow. Current ripples are easily observed forming today, and the shape of the ripples is useful in telling current direction. A current with a prevailing flow direction will form ripples that are asymmetrical in shape, with the down current side having a steeper slope. Back and forth flow, or oscillating flow, forms ripples that are symmetrical about the crest, with equal slopes on either side. This is a simple but powerful indicator of ancient flow direction, so when we observe ripple marks in rocks, we can interpret current activity before the sediment became lithified into a rock. Crossbedding is a series of tilted parallel layers within a single bed. At the top of the bed, the crossbeds are steeply dipping and truncated by the overlying bed, whereas the crossbeds go tangential or almost horizontal, almost parallel, to the bottom of the bed. These layers represent the cross-section of an ancient sand dune and are formed as wind or water currents build up sediment into a dune shape, with the prevailing current moving the material from the back of the dune to the front. Sand ultimately cascades down the steeper leading edge of the dune, called the slip face, and forms a crossbed in the process. As with ripple marks, crossbeds are useful in determining current direction, but they can also indicate what is the top and bottom of the bed, otherwise known as the stratigraphic up direction. These crossbeds can tell us quite a bit about ancient current activity, and from looking at the orientation of the crossbeds, we can say that the current was generally to the left. In areas of significant tectonic activity, where bedding can be folded and overturned, cross-bedding like this may help determine the stratigraphic up direction of the bed. And indeed, we can see here, at the top of the bed, the crossbeds are typically steeper and form an acute angle with the overlying bed. Thus, that is the top of the bed, and up is that way. Contrast this with the lower part of the bed where the crossbeds curve and go parallel with the bottom of the bed. We not only have some idea of ancient flow direction from this outcrop, but we also know that these rocks have not been overturned and they're still right side up. Again, we can observe and understand sedimentary structures forming today, like crossbedding in these gypsum sand dunes of White Sands National Park. We can thus interpret similar structures in rocks like the Jurassic Navajo sandstone in Zion National Park, allowing us to interpret the depositional environment of the ancient Earth. White Sands National Park is in south-central New Mexico, where a field of gypsum sand dunes covers about 700 square kilometers of the Tularosa Basin. From its source, Lake Lucero, to the southwest, sand is carried to the northeast by prevailing winds, forming several different dune types in the process. In this area, transverse dunes are transitioning to the Barken dunes seen farther to the northeast. The depth of the sand is about 30 feet below the inner dune surface, and the tallest dunes are about 60 feet high. Zion National Park is located in southwestern Utah. Here at Checkerboard Mesa in Zion National Park, the Jurassic Navajo sandstone displays several sets of beautifully exposed crossbedding in its highly joint-fractured walls. A southerly paleo wind direction can be inferred from most of these dune sets. These Zion area rocks represent a small sample of what was once a very large dune sea that covered much of the southwest during the Jurassic. Desiccation cracks, or mud cracks, form when wet, fine-grained sediment is exposed to the air and subsequently dries out, shrinks, and cracks. These features form because mud, silt and clay, has the ability to absorb a significant amount of water. But more importantly, it can only occur when the sediment is exposed to the atmosphere. Thus, mud cracks had to form from exposure to the atmosphere. This may not seem important, but it is a critical interpretation as to the depositional environment of the mud. At a minimum, we can say the mud was deposited above sea level, so we can rule out that it was deposited in the ocean or in a relatively permanent body of water on the continent, like a large lake. Lastly, trace fossils include features formed in soft sediment by organisms, and these may be tracks, trails, burrows, etc. No actual fossil remains of the organisms are observed, just the traces of their existence. These features can not only help describe the physical size and shape of the organisms, but are beneficial in understanding their movement and behavior as well. The study of trace fossils is fundamental in understanding past life, how and where it lived, etc. Areas where sediment is deposited are called depositional environments, or environments of deposition. These can be broadly divided into continental or non-marine environments that are above sea level, marine environments that are below sea level, and transitional environments that exist at the margins of the other two. Each of these can be subdivided into numerous smaller depositional environments. A variety of individual depositional environments exist, with each having many characteristics that help define the environment. This table here shows some of these environments. The three broad categories are marine, non-marine or continental, and transitional environments. Within each of those are individual depositional environments. Marine environments, you could have shallow marine, which may include a reef environment, or deep marine. Non-marine or continental environments could be river channels, floodplains, river deltas, alluvial fans, playas, lakes, glaciers, etc. Transitional environments between these two other ones could be beaches or lagoons. So the types of sediment, sedimentary structures, sedimentary rock types can all be used to build an interpretation of the original depositional environment, including what types of physical processes operated there, as well as what kinds of life forms may have existed. Well, that's all for now. Till next time.